find that when you talk about jungle warfare, nobody has the idea of what is jungle warfare to the standpoint of, and I don't know if you can see this, but I'm just going to just go like this real quick, and then I'm going to pass these around. When you look at these pictures, you see this poor guy in this jungle. Now, there could be 150,000 people standing around him, and you wouldn't even see him because the jungle was so dense and so tight that you couldn't see the people around you. And that was the biggest problem we had in the Vietnam War, was one is we didn't know who our enemy was, nor did you know where your enemy was, because they could pop up out of the ground, they could pop up out of a tree, or if you take a look at these forest pictures or these jungle pictures, they could be in there. And this is two matter of facts that we would go in when we'd finally get the opportunity to go into what we call the rear area, where they would have the main battalion headquarters. You would go in and you'd take a shower and you'd go get a haircut. Well, one night when we were out on what they call a kill team, where 4 people would go out in the middle of the night and set up an ambush type thing, and your whole purpose was, and I'll say this, was to kill whatever moved. Well, that night we killed our barber. Now, this guy had been cutting our hair forever, and it turned out that he was a Viet Cong spy. So you never knew who your enemy was. And this is going to sound tacky. This is going to sound a little racist, but it is not meant to be that way. They all dressed the same in black khaki or black silk clothes. For the most part, they all wore that kind of dome little hat for the sun. And this is going to sound cheesy, but they all looked alike, especially when you all dress the same, you all act the same, you kind of all look the same. So you really don't know who, what, when, or how, what's going on. Well, we got some troops coming in today? No, it looks like fire. Okay. So that's what made the war real difficult at that time. And I think the biggest thing that we need to make the connection with, it was the first war that we actually had the news right on the scene. In other words, they brought the war into your home. So this was the first time people actually got to see what true war was like. And what do you think that did back here at the States? It swayed a lot of people's opinion real quick when the only scenes you were seeing were dead Marines or dead soldiers or wounded Marines or soldiers being air-evac'd out of the area. All the casualty numbers would come in just like a polling position type thing. And what do you think that did to the morale of the people back in the United States? Well, the first thing that happened was they started what we call our draft dodgers. All the selective service guys that were lined up, and what they would do is every month they would go to what they call like a lottery, and they would pull out these certain amount of numbers, and if your number fell in that lottery, you were drafted into the armed forces. Guys, you were not drafted in the Army. You were drafted in the armed forces of the United States. So what they would do is they'd line 100 against the wall and go Army, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, Army, Marine Corps, Marine Corps, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, whatever. You didn't have a choice what branch of service you went into. So you could end up in any branch of the service. You thought you were going in the Army, but surprise, surprise, surprise. A lot of guys ended up in the Marine Corps, and that was the last place in the world they wanted to be. I joined the Marine Corps. I wasn't one of those individuals. I joined. And it wasn't because I wanted to be a hero and I was a hoorah guy and all this other stuff. It's just they were the ones that could get me out of town as quick as possible. And I say that because I was a juvenile delinquent. I lived in foster care. I was a maggot. I was the guy that everybody knew was going to go to prison. So I figured the easiest way out of town was to go join the Marine Corps, because the Marine Corps would take anything that would slither, slime, or slither on through the door, and I was one of those. Quick story to show you how great of a student I was. I pulled the fire alarm in school one day so I could have a cigarette while everybody was evacuated out of the building. So, been there, done it, and I'm not proud of it by any means. But what I'm trying to show you as a point is if you can find a turning point in your life, that you can turn your entire life around. And when my relatives sit here and think that I'm a school administrator, even the dead ones turn over in their grave, because never in a million years. My greatest act of defiance, and this is not bragging, I was out at Locker 3 having my normal afternoon cigarette and just enjoying the weather and enjoying my own personal company, and I took a drag off a cigarette and I got a tap on my shoulder, and I turned around. It was the dean of students, so I blew the smoke in his face and dropped a cigarette on the ground and put out the cigarette and said, okay, I'm ready to go home now. And so I went home for 3 days, but you know, I mean, that's part of the game. But anyway, so I knew I was going to hell in a handbag, okay? I knew that. There was no questions about it. So I joined the military. I joined at a very turbulent time. During that era, there was a lot of things going on. There was moratorium marches going on. In other words, marches of the individuals that had already been to Nam, that had come back, now that were marching against the war. Well, of course, what I call them the strap hangers, anybody who had nothing better to do joined in on those marches. And so they'd have these major marches going down the street and protesting the war. And you'd have all the Vietnam veterans in there wearing their uniforms with the sleeves cut off, and they'd have their medals on there and, you know, this kind of garbage. And they'd be protesting the war. So anybody that they could get to go along with them, they loved it. Well, the next thing that came about was, has anybody heard of the Black Panthers? The Black Panthers back in the 60s, especially about 65-ish, is when the Black Panthers really started their movement. And when I say started a movement, they became a very powerful movement throughout the college scene and throughout the United States. And all of a sudden, next thing we know, in the military, major influence of the Black Power within the military arena. And it was seen more in the Vietnam conflict because, and again, this is not being racist or anything, what I'm stating is a pure fact, that there became such a separation between the blacks and the whites during the Vietnam era, especially towards the end of the 60s, that you formed your own clique. You had the black cliques and you had the white cliques where you kind of hung together and neither the twain should meet. But when you went into the jungle, it was a different story. You're brothers. When you're in the jungle, I mean, I'm going to cover your butt just like you're going to cover mine. I don't care if you're black, white, purple, green, or yellow. That was the way it was. When you're in the bush, everybody was green. And when you came back to the rear, it's when the cliques came back together again. You know, and we have those cliques today. We all see it here. You have your social cliques, you have your skater cliques, you have your gang cliques, you have this, you have that. But back then, it was such a strong power that it got to a point where a lot of the blacks back then felt they were being picked on, to the point they were the ones that were being sent to the bush to be killed. They were the ones that were the point guys that were walking out front. So if we were ambushed or if we were shot at, they would be the first ones that would be shot. So what would happen was they would do everything they could in their power to stay in the rear, back at the battalion headquarters and stuff, so they wouldn't have to go to the bush. And it got to the point, for example, and I'm going to use you as an example. There was a special greeting. In fact, why don't you stand up and come on up here?